You were there yesterday. Yes, you're in these stories. That's why she's with you.
Go on up. This is show on the road.
Does that work?
Yep. Jason. Could we upgrade the seats for economy class so you could move forward?
I think that's a wonderful idea. If folks want to move forward, it's a more intimate conversation. So,
Sorry,
if you want to take a second before we get started, feel free to move forward.
We aren't dangerous.
Unless you're planning to leave early. If you're planning to leave early, you can stay. This isn't like stand-up comedy where if you sit in the front row, you're going to get harassed by the comedian. You don't have to do any improv. You don't sit in the front row. Nobody's All right, you ready? All right, so as people find their seats, we're going to get started. I want to thank you all for coming today. We're here at the Middle East Institute. We are so happy to be meeting under their auspices. I am Laura Friedman. I'm the president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. We are here today at an event co-sponsored by Americans for Peace Now and the New Israel Fund, featuring our friends from the Parent Circle. This is a time of great challenge for those of us who are committed to Israeli-Palestinian peace. It's a time of challenge based on what's happening in the region. It's a time of challenge based on what's happening right now in Warsaw, what's happening here in Washington, in Warsaw. So I think at a time like this, there maybe isn't a better moment to hear from voices who are adamantly committed to peace and who are indefatigably working and building hope. And it's the kind of hope that is fed not by simply wishing things were different, but by working and finding ways to actively make them different. I am continually inspired by the work of the Parent Circle, and I hope you will be as well. So I am terribly jet lagged. I flew in last night from Europe, so I am very happy to turn the floor over to my friend Howard Sumka, who will run the show today. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And thank you all for coming. And my own thanks to the three co-sponsors of this event. As Laura said, I'm Howard Sumka. For those of you who don't know me, I was the director of the USAID program for West Bank and Gaza for 4 years, ending in 2010, during the good years, as we all like to say. And I was, for a while, the CEO of the One Voice movement, and I'm now on the board of the American Friends of the Parent Circle Families Forum. So I have this conflict very deep in my blood. Robi Damelin, on my left, is the, what?
I got a shock. I just jumped.
Oh. Do I have to keep an eye on you?
Absolutely.
Yes. Robi Damelin is an Israeli spokesperson for the Parent Circle Families Forum. She is a world traveler who takes her message all over the place, her message of reconciliation. Mazen Faraj is the Palestinian co-director of the Parent Circle. There's also an Israeli co-director who's obviously not here with us. And Mazen also spends a lot of time traveling around the world taking his message out. The Parent Circle, which used to be and sometimes even is by people called the Bereaved Families Association, began 20 years ago, more or less. It's now a thoroughly joint Israeli-Palestinian organization, as evidenced by the two co-directors and offices both in Israel and in the West Bank. And it's an organization that, to be a member of, you have to be a bereaved family member for someone who was killed in the conflict. So it's a hard organization to belong to. They ran a very effective ad campaign, public information campaign, I should say, last year, in which a succession of members of the organization simply said, "We don't want you here." And it was a very powerful emotional message. The three of us will have a little discussion about what's going on the ground, the work of the Parent Circle, the situation in the sort of broader political context. This is not a political organization. They won't say political things, right?
No.
No. But there is a political context in which they work. And we'll talk about all of that. And then I hope to leave a fair bit of time for Q&A. The real power of the Parent Circle is the moral authority that people like Robi and Mazen and hundreds of others who have lost somebody in the conflict bring with them when they stand up and say, "I rejected revenge, I rejected anger, and I'm turning my grief into reconciliation." And it's a very, very powerful message that they deliver on the ground in Israel and Palestine, as well as on their travels around the world. So it's appropriate that we start this with each of them talking about, for briefly, their story, their loss, how they got to the Parent Circle, and then we'll move into some of the other issues that we want to talk about. So we will start first with my friend Mazen, who agreed to be first.
I'm a Palestinian.
Because yesterday Robi was first.
No. Yesterday and the day before I was first. Thank you, Howard. And thank you all for being here today. And to be honest with you, I'm so happy it will be the last meeting and I'm going home today. It's not an easy thing to start your day talking about your loss and bereavement and darkness, but actually this is what we called our mission. And in the days of darkness, in the days of very hard things going around, and in the days that in a very simple way we feel that there is no hope, it's very good to be with others, it's very good to be with supporters, and it's very good to have a new power and a new energy. So before we start the meeting, I will say thank you very much for each one of you that he will give me a new power and a new energy to go back to my home. My name is Mazen. I'm 43 years old. Actually, after 2 months, I will be 44. I have 3 daughters. That's why I have all this white hair in my head. And I born and grew up in the Hesha refugee camp near Bethlehem. I'm a Palestinian. I'm a Muslim. And as Rami Al-Hanan said, my dear brother, before anything else, I'm a human being. So to grow up in a refugee camp, it means that everything's in your life happening with a question mark. It means that you all the time you have to ask all these questions inside yourself about your life, your family, your history, your narrative, and about the situation that we deal with it every day in our daily life, and about the most of the time in the summer without water, and about most of the time in the winter without electricity, and about if we want to have, and that's time when we're being kids, to have a play, we have to play in the streets. We don't have a gardens, we don't have nothing. And it's about why we're supposed to be more than 60 to 70 in my classroom when I was in the school. So it was kind of to grow up with a very heavy narrative and very heavy situation that you have to carry on all the time. And you have to express yourself, you have to do things. And the story behind my family, my father was 6 years old when he expelled from his original village in 1948, what we call it our Nakba, our catastrophe. And they just run from the fear and the war and the violence and the death. And they find themselves in refugee camps in West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. And they just told them it will be for the short time, but this short time it will be in a few months, 71 years for our Nakba, our catastrophe. So this is how I grew up. And this is how I continue my life every day. And I found myself so active in the first uprising, the first intifada, in the age of 14, 15 years old. Like most of the Palestinians, the first intifada. And I found myself in the age of 15 in Israel jail for a few months for the first time in my life when I was a kid. And it was after that few times, and I spent almost 3 years and a half in Israel jail. For your culture, it's not because I killed anyone and not because I stole money from anyone. I've been in Israel jail because I was a freedom fighter, fighting for my rights and my justice and my freedom. I lost my education, I lost my school. Rather than to build my life and my future, I was in a different life, in a different situation. And we ended up with the first intifada with Oslo Agreement, the peace agreement. And went to that week to the streets, celebrating the peace and celebrating that soon it will be our independent state as a Palestinian. As they said, it will be for this peace agreement will be for 5 years, and then the Palestinians they will have their independent state. But this 5 years was last year 25 years for our Oslo agreement since that time until now. And all what we get from Oslo agreement, in that time the settlers they've been more or less 100,000 in the West Bank. In 2019 there are more than 600,000 in West Bank. And we get more the walls and the checkpoints, and we get more the hatred and the violence when they start the second intifada, the second uprising in 2000, after we failed to protect and to save the Oslo agreement. So start a new intifada, more violence and more people get killed. And since 2000 until 2005, more than 7,000 Palestinians in Israel was killed. And in April 2002, we've been under the curfew in my camp, and we received a phone call from the hospital that my father, or the body of my father in the hospital, and if we can go and to see what's happened to him. And we went to the Israeli army, and they just said, not allowed. You have to wait until the morning. I cannot imagine there's anyone can wait all this long night and long hours, but this actually what we mean to live more than 51 years under the military law of the Israeli occupation. And this is what we mean by that. All the time, this system of military law try to build inside ourselves the culture of not allowed to be free, and not allowed to have your dream, not allowed to have your education, not allowed to choose and decide anything in your life. So my father was coming back from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. He was 62 years old. And the Israeli army, they start shooting him and they kill him in a very violent way. And all what he have in his hand, a few things for his family and for his children. So after 3 days of our Muslim tradition, we have to wake up in the morning and to continue the normal life, which is, I can say there is nothing normal anymore since that time until now, which is how to deal with this new tragedy, with all this anger, with all this suffering, with all these emotions. And the most important, how to continue to live and to handle and to deal with a new tragedy in your life, that you cannot forget it, and you cannot ignore it, and you cannot live with it, and you cannot live without it. Well, it took me a few years to know what I really want. And after a few years, one from my friend invited me to meet the Parent Circle, the Bereaved Families Forum, the Israelis. And I said, are you crazy? How come I will meet my enemy? And how come I will sit around the table with my enemy? Because all my life as a Palestinian, I know the Israelis very well, as a settlers, as a soldiers. I never met an Israeli as a human being. Well, I was really curious about this meeting, and I went, and it was Ramil Hanan speaking about his daughter Smadar that was killed in 1997, and about his suffering and pain and his personal story. And I start to compare. What do you mean by you are an Israeli? How come you are suffer? Because I'm the one who live in a refugee camp, and I'm the one who live under the occupation, and I'm the one who been in Israel prison. because this is actually how we all the time we used to deal with ourselves. We used to put ourselves in a box of victimhood and to continue without any kind of responsibility. And he started to talk about the path and the journey that he took after the kill of his daughter. And I started really to be connected to the path and to the journey of peace and reconciliation. And doesn't mean that I fall in love with the Israelis, but I really fall in love with the journey and fall in love with the process. And since that time until now, I devote my life, I devote everything in my life for this message and for this mission. I start like so curious to how to meet the Israelis and how to speak with them, but ended up with mission. And the minute that you have a mission in your life, everything's become more hard and more difficult, especially that all what we are doing, we're doing while all this, the continuation of this conflict and the continuation of this occupation. So there's a few challenges in the way. It's a personal challenge. How come a Palestinian, he will wake up, live in a refugee camp, and to believe in peace and reconciliation after all what's happened to him, and suddenly he's in a different path. The second challenge, how to tell your society and your neighbors, your family, your friends, what you are doing is doing for our case as a Palestinian. And the third one, how come one day to be ready to reconcile with your enemy. So it's a long journey. It's a very hard process, but this is actually what I decided and chose in 2005. I never chose and decide to be a refugee, live in a refugee camp. And I never chose and decide to be in a prison. And I never chose and decide to be a brave son. But in 2005, I chose and decide to be a peacemaker. Thank you very much.
So good morning. Is this thing working? Yes. Good. Thank you, Howard. I don't know how you've suffered me all these years. And you've been such an amazingly staunch supporter of the Parent Circle, even from the days when you could push a grant. I wish you were still there, and many other things. You know, I've told my story so many times, and things have developed so much within my own rhetoric. I have a very sharp tongue, as you may have noticed. But I have learned that there is a rhetoric of peace. I tried very much to find a way. This morning I was listening to CNN, and today's the anniversary of Parkland. And one of the mothers was talking, and I had such a sense of empathy for her because she read a letter that she wrote to her daughter. And I can tell you that that is the most cathartic thing and the most extraordinary way to commemorate your child. And that's what I decided to do. And I'm writing over the past year a book which I want really, it's letters to David, but it's not a monument of misery because I'm not a monument of misery. It's trying to bring other parents a message to understand that they don't have to die with their children. There's a way that you can perhaps prevent other families from experiencing this pain. And that drive allows you to get out of bed in the morning. So I decided, Howard, you've never heard this because you've probably had enough of me anyway. I'm going to read you a letter that I wrote to David because it tells the story in a nutshell. I promise it doesn't go on for 3 hours.
2.5.
My love, I am reminded of the day you came to visit. We sat very close together on the couch, each of us with a glass of whiskey. You shared something so painful, and once again, I understood what it is to be a child brought up in Israel and what a dilemma you were facing when you were called to serve in the reserves. This happened every year, and you went, but this was different. This time, you were called to serve in the occupied territories. Previously, you had signed a letter created by reserve officers that they would not serve in the occupied territories. and you were a part of this movement. You were also part of the peace movement. How sad it was that you had to face this quandary. You said that your students would soon be called up to do their basic training, and if you did not go, what kind of an example would that be? As you were the officer, how would your soldiers feel if you deserted them? One of your main arguments was that you and your soldiers would treat people with dignity. I guess that people find it difficult to see the person behind the gun. So you decided to go, and I was filled with a sense of dread. We had a lovely lunch the day before you set off to go to reserves, and I can still see you in your red jersey waving and saying, "I love you." Saturday, you called to see how I was and to tell me where you were and that you were like sitting ducks in a deep valley with an old British police station close to the settlement and Ramallah. Normally, you would not share these kind of things, and that threw me into a panic. After our last "I love you," I started to clean the house in a mad frenzy. I woke up very early in the morning and rushed off to my office. Was it perhaps to avoid hearing some news? I guess I will never know. I could not work. It was as if I was waiting, and a few hours later, there was a knock on the door, and when I opened it, there were 3 soldiers with a doctor to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper. Actually, they did not have to say anything. I knew why they had come to, and what they had come to say. I knew. And apparently one of the first things I said was, "You may not kill anyone in the name of my child." I do not remember this, but this I was told. "My darling child, what would I do without you? You said I should not worry. You would look after me when I grew old." The next few days are a complete blur. Thousands of people came to your funeral and to the flat. It became impossible to be there. So I ran away with Connie, your big love, and we sat in the park and hugged each other. I had to have some quiet, and so when everyone went home, I poured a glass of whiskey. You'll notice there's a lot of whiskey in my life. And placed one of the cats to purr on my heart and listened to the Goldberg variations. This, I think, you would have appreciated. It took a year or 2 for me to understand what you meant when you said that you and your soldiers would treat people with dignity. I was giving a talk at the American Embassy, and I noticed a Palestinian man looking at me intensely, as if he wanted to say something. Some people are afraid to approach bereaved mothers. They think that they might add to their pain. So I went to speak to him and said, "What?" And he told me that he drove through the checkpoint, and this very tall young man came to the car and asked for his papers. The soldier apologized and said he would do it as fast as possible. Then you had a conversation and you recognized the humanity in each other. When he heard the next day that you had been killed, he was so sorry. You see, this in fact is the essence of all the work that we are doing and what was to come in my life. Iran, your darling brother, was a rock through all the days that followed. How insensitive was I not to realize just how much pain he was in. In fact, in many ways, parents become the central figures in a tragedy such as yours, and often the siblings are ignored. It took me many years and a period of visiting a psychologist together with Iran to understand just how unfair this is. How could he compete for my love with a dead hero in the background? I knew almost immediately that I wanted to do something to prevent other mothers from experiencing this excruciating and never-ending pain. I did not know what. About 2 months after you were killed, I was asked to speak at a demonstration against the occupation in Tel Aviv. I have no idea what gave me the courage, but I said yes. I never prepare anything before speaking, as what I say comes from the heart. But I knew there would be thousands of people and that I did not want to make mistakes with my questionable Hebrew. The words I wrote are prophetic, and when reading them now, I could have written them yesterday. This was written in May, on May the 11th, 2002. David, my soul child, I cannot believe that I'm standing here today and not you. We always thought that revolutions start from people and not politicians who are stuck in their way and ego. You were a leader, not a politician. So I pluck up the courage to stand before thousands and thousands of people to bring a message of love and tolerance, so much a part of your essence. 70 days have passed since you gave up your life on that terrible morning at a political checkpoint for a cause in which you did not believe. 69 days since they removed the checkpoint. 67 since the settlers from Ofra stated that you and your soldiers were there to guard them and not to care about their own lives. Is life so cheap in Ofra that they are willing to bring up their children in an atmosphere of mortal danger? I think that this behavior is actually child abuse. And the proof is that each generation of settlers becomes more radical. Is life so cheap that the Prime Minister could go down to the cafeteria in Parliament the day you and your soldiers and citizens were killed and say, enough of this moaning and groaning? It seems to me that tears will never stop falling from my eyes. Tears for my personal loss and tears for someone who could have inspired people to make a difference and to read and to educate and to open minds to the value of philosophy, music, literature, and yes, food. Tears for the daily message of, hi mom, lots of love. Can we not as a nation realize the scars the Intifada uprising is leaving on both the Palestinian and our children? Can we not realize that our presence in the occupied territories will only lead to more and more violence and to the ruination of more and more families touched by death? The pain is the same for any mother, be he Israeli or Palestinian. And no matter what reason they think it was worthwhile to sacrifice their child, their lives will never be the same. I appeal to the Palestinians who suffer the same pain as me to help convince our side that the future can be one of coexistence. We just cannot do it alone. Can we as a nation not understand the longing that the Palestinians to have their own homeland? Have we become so cynical after all we have been through not to understand their pain? Is any piece of land worth all this pain and suffering? I want to end by telling you what is written on your grave. It is not that you died for a cause that you did not believe in, but that all the earth was your birthplace and all mankind your brothers, by the Lebanese philosopher Khalid Gibran. Much love to you, my sweet David, Ma. So I wanted you to be a part of that and to understand the consequence of the violence, the consequence of what happens to a whole family, of how it falls apart, and the choices that you make. What will you do? Will you die with your child, as many parents do? Or will you try to go on a path to find some way to make a difference? Will you associate with the person that killed your child to prove that actually, you know, your word is what you say? All of these things are difficult. Will you forgive? What is forgiving? Giving up your right to justice? Is it okay what the person did? Can they do it again? Or should you forget? It's quite extraordinary what all of this means, because it's all looking for your own honesty in a long, long path. I hate the word journey because it's one of these peace words that everybody uses. So I don't use that word. Also, tolerance is not a good word, by the way. And so in my own life, I think I learned so many lessons, and how extraordinary to say that I'm very grateful. Thank you.
You're right, Robi. I've known you for a dozen years. I never heard that before. I hate to turn the discussion to some mundane things, and both of your statements are, so powerful. But if we could change the mood a little bit, I think people would be interested to hear exactly what the Parent Circle Families Forum does. What kinds of programs are you running on the ground to try to advance on the path of reconciliation?
I'll just say one thing and then Mazen will do it, okay? And what is the long-term vision of this organization? Because we aren't just here to make you feel sad, okay? We have a vision. The long-term vision is to create a framework for a reconciliation process which should become an integral part of any future peace agreement, political peace agreement. Because without that, we'll just have another ceasefire till the next time. So that's why, what Mazen will explain, why we do the work we do on the ground, it's to prepare people for a future peace agreement.
I think before we go on what we are doing, we have to say who we are.
Okay.
We are an organization with 600 families, Palestinian and Israelis. They lost the loved one in this conflict. We are with this 18 people that they're working as a joint staff in the Parent Circle, in the office in Palestine, the other office in Tel Aviv. And we are this 1,000 alumni from our project, Palestinian and Israelis, and they become more our ambassador on the ground. So what we are decided in 2012, that we are going in a very, very deep process inside the organization between the members, between the staff, and between the board. And we succeed in 2016 to have a full joint organization, which is mean all this decision, all this management, all this money, all this project have to do it together, Palestinian and Israelis. And which is mean that we went more down and more deep to our relation as a Palestinian and Israelis in terms of understanding and knowing and respect. All what we build inside the organization based on one word, which is respect. Respect the other side and respect the needs, respect the rights, respect everything that in our lives. And in 2016 is the first time ever in this organization that we had a joint board, Palestinian and Israelis. There's nothing called anymore Palestinian board and the Israeli board. They sit around the table and they discuss and decide with everything it's connected to the organization. In 2017, it was the first time in this organization to be the chairman of the board. He's a Palestinian, not an Israeli. So we become to the way of, in one word, after all this very deep process internal, the organization, we become to the word of trust. And this is actually what we need and what we want to do all what we are doing in the ground. Because without this a full partnership, without a joint organization, without trust, without respect, without knowing, we'll never succeed to do anything and to convince the others what's mean the peace and reconciliation in the Middle East, or for us. In 2010, we start a very big project that we call it History Through the Human Eyes. And as you saw, when I spoke about myself as a Palestinian, how I grew up, I know very well what's happened in 1948. It's my Nakba, my catastrophe. But if you ask the Israelis what that's mean for them, it's mean the independent states for Israel. And if you're going for all these days, milestones through the history, every Palestinian and Israeli see it in a different way, in a different narrative. And that's what we decide to have all this work according to build a space where the Palestinian and the Israelis, they can be together and they can express themselves about their personal story, about their pain, about their narrative, about everything. And we just said for the two groups, you don't have to agree. But please start to understand and listen to the other side and start to discover there is another narrative in this country, and then start to understand and to discover the humanity of the other side. And with a few meetings with these two groups, Palestinian and Israelis, the major tours that they are doing, one to Yad Vashem Museum in Jerusalem, and most of the Israelis, they've been before in Yad Vashem, but this is the first time to be with a Palestinian in Yad Vashem. This is the first time to be with a Palestinian through your history, through your pain, and especially all that story behind the Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust, what's happened to the Jewish. And how it will be the reaction of the Palestinian, how they can understand what's happened to the Jewish, how come they will be connected emotionally or personal on a political level. Everything is happening there. There's a lot of Palestinians, they just said, what I'm doing here, it's not my narrative. What I'm doing here, it's not my fault, it's a German fault. All these questions, it's very good to hear it, and this is actually what we look for. And a week after, they have the same tour in a Lifta village, which is a destroyed village in 1948, a Palestinian village. And all the Palestinians, they know very well what's mean the Nakba, but this is the first time to do it through the eyes of the Israelis, how the Israelis see our Nakba. So this is part from the project itself, and since 2010 until now, we did more than 34 groups. It's almost 1,000 alumni from the Palestinian and Israelis in a different profession, like doctors, educators, civil society, lawyer, and grannies, and whoever can be part from this project. And actually, we started this project funded by the USAID, but actually, to be honest with you, 2 weeks ago, we have to close out this project with the cut of fund for the USAID. And it's bring us more to the challenges and the difficulties of the organization that we already started in 2019 about the cut of fund for the USAID. $300,000 from our budget to 2019 and $300 more for 2020. It was cutting like 2 weeks ago for our projects. We will see it as numbers, as money, but we see it as an effect on the ground. We see it as something that bring the Palestinians and the Israelis together in one room and one space to be together and to try to build all this bridge between them rather than to build more wall and checkpoints between the two nations. So it means that we will cut a lot of our salaries in the staff, and few people, they will have to go home. In a full picture, it's mean, in one word, all these procedures and all this new policy against the Palestinians and the feeling of not justice, just us, it's about more and lack of hope for the Palestinians, and try to imagine there's a full of nation living without hope. All this policy is going there. The second things that we are doing, we are so active in the social media, and we are so active in everything that we can in the media, and we use the media for our benefit as an organization. Especially this message coming from people, they pay the highest price in this conflict. So no one can argue with us about how much we need a solution for this conflict, because we know very well what's that mean. We are doing the summer camps every year for our bereaved members from age of 13 to 17. And to be honest with you, in the summer camp, all the Palestinian kids, all what they care about, to see the sea. And it was every time we're doing the summer camp, all the Palestinian kids, it's the first time for them to see the sea. All the time they just see it through the TV or through the internet, but suddenly they touch the sea and they are in the sea. We start 2 years ago, the very important and amazing project that for our next generation. After they finish the summer camp, they become an age 18 to 25. So we just built a very good project for them, how they will be the next generation and the next leaders for this organization. As you see, we become, both of us, so old, Robi and I, so we have to be prepared for the next generations.
Speak for yourself.
Okay. And we have a very good network with other organizations. If I can say what we are doing every day, it's like take me like maybe a few hours to say what really we are doing. But what I want you to understand, it's not just an organization about bereavement. It's not two Palestinian and Israelis sitting together and eating hummus and falafel. It's a real dialogue. It's a real life. It's a real challenge. It's a real difficult. And in one word, we build a very good example how can be this conflict ended by one word, respect. Yes.
You had a throwaway line in there about losing your USAID money, and we're going to come back to that. But in this arena, so to speak, there are over 100 grassroots nonprofit organizations that are working on peace. There are people in this room who are in some of those groups. How does that work? How do you coordinate? To what extent do you interact with other organizations? How do you avoid sort of stepping over each other's toes and are able to make the most of the resources you get for these things?
Well, I think it's a very sad situation with USAID now because there will be so many organizations looking for the pot of money from the same place. And that makes it difficult because you can't help but compete. We work very closely with Combatants for Peace because we have a great rapport with them because many of them also are bereaved. Every year we have a ceremony on Memorial Day, Israeli Memorial Day for soldiers, which is quite incredible. You can watch it. It's spread all over the world, so you can certainly watch it on YouTube. And last year was very exceptional. David Grossman made a beautiful, beautiful speech. And so any of you that have a salon with a lot of people, invite them to watch the ceremony. Our remarkable Minister of Defense last year, in his great wisdom, decided not to allow 200 Palestinians to come to the ceremony. You know, there is this statement, there's no one to talk to. And here are 200 Palestinians who want to come on a very, very sensitive day to share their feeling and their pain with us and to empathize with us. And so we decided to take Mr. Lieberman to court because he didn't say that they couldn't come out of security reasons. He said that other parents might be offended. Now think how offensive that is. Firstly, I don't think that we have any right as bereaved parents to criticize what anybody else does. However you wish to commemorate your family member is certainly your business, and I have no right to judge what you're doing. But you certainly also don't have any right to judge what I'm doing. And so we went to court, to the High Court in Jerusalem, and I was going to make this huge Porsche speech, but I didn't have to because we won. So we also got an enormous amount of publicity around what was happening. And that was wonderful because we got 8,000 people came to the ceremony. So we thought we should send Lieberman a bouquet of flowers to say thank you afterwards. He is no longer the Minister of Defense because we seem to have a Prime Minister who can manage the whole world by himself.
One man show.
So let's see what happens next year after the elections. But that's just one example of working together with another organization. Obviously, if there's a demonstration or something that another group does, we go to their demonstrations. They come to a lot of our projects, especially the Narrative Project, because that's something which is a teaching project, which allows people to understand how to dialogue, how to listen, and to listen in a way, even if you don't agree. Because when you don't agree, it usually turns into a fight, right? But in this case, you might not agree with the way the other person sees their history, but you would create empathy. And that's one of the things that I think personally can be very much imported into your country. I watched Charlottesville, and I looked at the mother who said, you may have killed my daughter, but you magnified her voice. And then I thought to myself, if the white prejudiced people, and we all suffer from subtle prejudice, let's not kid ourselves, and the African Americans with slavery background would sit in the park and each one would say why the statue should be there or why it should be destroyed. It's not that they would all become Martin Luther King, but they certainly would create an empathy and an understanding for how the other sees their history. That's the beginning of a rapport. And that's something that should be, you cannot exclude people because you don't agree with them, because what you will do is just make them more radical. And I think that's something that the parent circle can teach, and I'm hoping that we can export a lot of the programs that we have to other groups who, because we've had so much experience, and to other countries, can learn from our parallel narrative programs, from the way that we conduct a summer camp, in that what Mazen told you about the summer camp is true about the sea, but what is so exciting is that the kids who went to the summer camp originally are now the facilitators, which means it's ongoing. There's no point in a temporary high relationship. In fact, it's destructive. It's much better to have it as an ongoing. And that's what's happened in the summer camp. And to see these kids from the summer camp now be part of the young ambassadors, that's very rewarding, because there's some point to the work that you're doing. To watch the alumni from the parallel narrative group create a booklet for hospital. These were doctors and people from the medical profession, not bereaved. You must understand that we're not working with bereaved people, we are working with the public. They created a book which is phonetic Hebrew and Arabic, so that if you're in a ward with someone who doesn't speak your language, you can say, can I call the doctor for you? How are you? Would you like a glass of water? These are small things, but they are huge steps in relationships. Do you want me to go until tomorrow morning?
No. That was good, thank you. And let me, since you brought up the Memorial Day ceremony in Israel, the past 2 years, on the day that Memorial Day ceremony is held, we had events here in Washington. Last year at 6th and I Synagogue, the year before at the DCJCC, at which we showed clips from the Israel ceremony and then had, live performances. David and Aaron Schneer come and sing and so on. So if you're here, you're probably on the right mailing list, and you'll find out, assuming we do it again. It was co-sponsored by NIF and APN, I believe. And it was under the leadership, and I should have introduced her earlier, of Shiri Orion, who's sitting in the back. Shiri is the executive director of the American Friends of the Parent Circle, and is really the driving force behind what American Friends does in this country, raising money and raising awareness about the issues. We all just had a very big weekend in New York.
We called her Pharaoh this week.
Okay, I think there were a couple of other things I wanted to talk about, but I think we have a half hour left, and I would really like there to be enough time for questions, and I suspect people have questions. And if you don't, then I have some. So, yeah, you have a mic? Okay. Well, why don't we start in the front and just work back? So.
Small room. Can you hear me? Would you mind?
No, but they're taping it.
With a mic.
Yes.
Okay. Is it on? No.
No, it's not on. See, that's the problem with mics.
No, it's on.
It's green. Okay. Now.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can you just introduce
I'm
yourself?
going to. Yeah, I was about to. I was just making sure this worked. My name's Joyce Schwartz, and I'm on the board of New Story Leadership, which is a grassroots organization here that brings together Israeli and Palestinian university students and slightly older. There. And my question has to do with the value of grassroots organizations. I have been to so many events where I feel I'm being patted on the head by policymakers who are sort of saying to me, there, little lady, that's really nice, but what really matters is what happens up at our expert level. And I honestly am often open-mouthed. How do you answer people who say things like that?
Do you want to answer, Howard?
I don't understand.
I understand.
I'll answer people what?
You can answer.
Why don't you?
What? Okay. I will. Since I used to be on that side of the game, and I myself had some feelings in that direction also, that the big decisions were going to be political decisions, and they involved a lot of money, and what was happening at the grassroots was not central to what was going on. But I've learned a good bit in the dozen years or so I've been working on this issue. And I think my answer to that question is that you can't make peace at the upper levels. The politicians can't make peace that the people they represent won't accept. Because as soon as you try that peace agreement, if you have resistance at the grassroots, it's going to fall apart. People won't accept it, people won't make the compromises that need to be made, and that if it's necessary, but obviously not sufficient, to build a base on the ground of acceptance for the kinds of peace agreement that needs to be made. Whatever peace agreement might eventually come out between the Israelis and the Palestinians, both sides are going to have to give up a lot. And if the people haven't been prepared to give up a lot, then they're not going to accept it. And the whole purpose of grassroots work, there are some 110 organizations that belong to the Alliance for Middle East Peace, which represents all of the organizations working in this area. Their job is to build up at the grassroots, first of all, an understanding of your, quote, enemy, not as the other, but as a human being who has needs and valid rights. And I think that's the value of grassroots work, and it's essential.
Can I say something? Absolutely. I think we have a very good experience from Oslo Agreement. Suddenly we wake up in the morning and we have a peace agreement without to know what that means, and without to know how it will be and how the future of this Oslo Agreement and the peace agreement. And that's why I think we failed. It was like signing by the politicians without at least to let the two nations to be part from it. And what we look for, it's not really a politicians. We look for a new leaders, a real leaders that can really lead our case and to end this conflict in a different way. Without the work on the ground, without all of this, with all what's happening on the ground with this very hard time and very difficult time, together with that, we have to continue. We cannot give up the work on the ground. It's a grassroots movement. It's like to throw the stone to the water, and all this circle, it's become more and more and more big. It's, with all the politicians, it's now, they just decided in our lives, all what we can say, one thing, we went to the other side, which is the human level of this conflict. Where is it? All of us, we want a peace agreement. All of us want to end this conflict, but how? Which price that we have to pay to end this conflict? Yes.
Just work back, Tom.
Hello, my name is Tom Getman. I want to say thank you first, because since the days that Karen and I worked in Jerusalem with a large NGO, the Grieving Parents Circle meant so much to us at the Seven Arches when you were meeting there. And I know that the sacrificing of children is one of the most powerful ways to get to people's hearts. And some of us have just been to Shame at the Mosaic Theater, which tells the story of Annette Weissman, who was censored. And the arts are being censored. Is the Grieving Parents Circle and the Combatants for Peace being censored and reduced in their impact because of government policies? We've heard that that's on the horizon, if it's not already happening. So it's not just the funding that's being minimized, it's the power of your impact in the community, there and here, that might be minimized if the same thing happens to you that's happening to the arts. Can you speak to that? Is that happening, or are you staying strong So, or even becoming stronger at the grassroots because of that kind of pressure.
Amazingly enough, you know, the parent circle has a certain standing in both communities. So we managed to continue with work because firstly we're not considered to be the word normalizing, you know, so, and combatants for peace. I think you're talking about breaking the silence. And actually breaking the silence just won a case. The Attorney General said that the work that they're doing is not illegal, which is quite a step in their direction because they were being very much persecuted by the government. I think in many ways there's a kind of, in Israel, holy cow about bereaved families. So it's not as intense as it used to be because they had some awful scenes in Parliament recently. But I can't say that we have been censored. Occasionally, parents don't want us to come into schools. You know, we work in a lot of schools. And they then bring a journalist who writes, you know, how can you let terrorists into your school? But in the main, we continue to do our work wherever we are. Of course, there are so many people who don't agree with us, but those are the people we need to talk to. And Breaking the Silence, I think, is the most incredible organization because I think they are the evidence for a future reconciliation process. And so I think they're very brave also. In our case, because we are who we are, it's very interesting to watch because you can't really fight with us too much, you know, unless you call us terrorists or I'm known as the most dangerous woman in the world. I find that's a compliment. But I think if you look at the ambassador now to Israel from America, I think he is behind a lot of the dangerous decisions that have been taken to move the embassy. I don't think people understand how dangerous that decision was, because when you take away hope from people, they become angry. And it's not about hate, it's also about fear. Because when you fear that you have no future, what are you going to do? You have nothing to do except be violent. The whole idea of cutting off work that is cross-border, what do you want to do? You want to bring the Palestinians to their knees? And if you do that, you think you will make them make peace? You know, I keep saying at every lecture that we give, if you think about the First World War, after the Allies won, they tried to bring Germany completely to its knees. They would not allow Germany to recover. So what happened? We all know. You cannot force people to make peace. It's like you can't force people to forgive. That's immoral. And so I don't know where the head is here. And I fear that an American ambassador should not have the capacity, and I hope that the Democratic Party now in Congress will start to investigate who this man really is, because he is physically and economically supporting settlements, Gush Etzion, and that is very dangerous. Even if you agree with him, he shouldn't have that capacity as an ambassador.
Could I, before we go to, could you address the question from the Palestinian side?
Which is what?
Whether you have resistance from the Palestinian Authority or from the normalization forces on the ground that get in the way of doing your work?
Of course, as I said before, it's this work and this mission, it's having a lot of challenges and difficulties, and one from them, how to explain to the Palestinian society what's mean the dialogue between the Palestinian and Israelis. And it's connected to to your question, Howard, about all these NGOs and all these organizations in Palestine and Israel. I think how it's built, all these NGOs, a long time ago, it was really so far from the Palestinian society, all these organizations. And we just, I will be so honest to say that most of these organizations, they're just running to speak with the Israelis without to speak with their community, the Palestinians. And most of them, they run to have a dialogue with the Israelis without to have a real dialogue with the Palestinian society. And that's why I put all this organization in the world of normalization. Or normalization, or you are traveling abroad in 5-star hotel. But this is actually what it was part from our strategy as an organization, especially in the Palestinian side, how to be more connected to the Palestinian society, how to understand what they think, what they feel, what they suffer, and how to explain to the Palestinian society what we are doing. I'm doing here, I've been here in the state for a week. I don't know if I have to tell my society about it, if I have to explain that I met with a congressman and I talk about the Palestinian case, I talk about our life, or I should like keep it for me and that's it. And this is the question. How much these NGOs, 110 NGOs, including the Parent Circle, to be honest with your society and to be more connected. With this honest and connected, we will face all this anti-normalization. With this honest and connected, we will recruit more people to be part from this field, which is the cross-border and peace building. The last thing, I completely understand when the Palestinians, they said normalization. It's a different view, different opinion, and we have to. And you cannot ask anyone in Palestine to wake up in the morning and please come and sit with the Israelis. For what? Why? How? If you ask any Palestinians that live in a refugee camp, do you want to speak with the Israelis? He will say, no. For what? But this is actually the mission. How to convince the Palestinians that what we are doing for ourselves as a Palestinian, not for the Israelis. What we part from the Parent Circle because we still struggle against this occupation. We're still doing a joint work against this occupation. That's what I mean by to build all this network in Palestine. And I did it. I built a very network from different organizations in a peace field and other field too. Yes.
So I was working front to back, and this gentleman had his hand up before.
Hi, I'm Andrew Herod. I'm an independent writer and researcher, among others. I'm a Campus Watch Fellow for the Middle East.
Can
Forum.
you speak slowly?
Whoa.
I'm from Dahesha, not from Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah, all right then. All right. Well, yes, in particular, your group has been a subject of a blog called This Ongoing War, written by bereaving Israeli parents who lost their daughter in a self-described jihadist terrorist attack in Jerusalem. And they have enormous criticisms of your group and say that it really doesn't represent bereaving parents in Israel at all. For example, they talk about how you're foreign funded by European governments, et cetera. And in particular, they raised the question that you never talk about jihadist, unrepentant terrorist ideology among Palestinians who have really no desire for peace and just simply want to kill more Israelis and destroy Israel. Do you have any comments on such criticism?
Is this Arnold Roth?
It's on This Ongoing War. It's written by bereaving parents in Israel.
No, but the one who wrote that specific piece.
They're daughters of a girl, Malfi.
Yeah, it's Arnold Roth. He's really likes me a lot. But I would ask you a question. You actually listened to us today. Did you see anything that had anything to do with terrorists or with anything else that might be questionable in what we have said?
See, that's the whole point, is you never discuss the jihadist terrorism and this really, indeed, genocidal ideology from groups like Hamas that seeks to simply destroy the Israeli state, the Jewish state.
But who are we as a group? If we were a group of political advisors to Netanyahu, maybe that's the sort of thing that we would discuss. The thing that we discuss is how can we get to the point where we would see the humanity in the other. Of course, there are groups who do not agree with us. If everybody was in agreement, we wouldn't have any problems, would we? So if you really think about it, I don't mind what Arnold Roth has to say about and what his opinion is. What I do object to is when they use, there's an organization called Imtirtzu, if you want it. It means that they use bereaved parents, and that I find terrible. because to push a political agenda, and by doing this you use bereaved parents, that's dangerous. We don't talk about anybody that wants to come to our group can only be aligned to the message of reconciliation. Otherwise, why on earth would they be in our group? And so that answers your question, I think, but I think they're entitled to their opinion. And I wish he would come. I have invited them several times to come for a discussion. And let me tell you what happened the other day. There are a group of bereaved parents who come from Imtirtsu, who really wanted to reinstate capital punishment and to have, what's it called, like, God, I can't think of words in English, how impossible. When you punish a whole village, collective punishment. When you have collective punishment and capital punishment, they really wanted to reinstate this. I mean, that's like going back so that there would be, people would be hanged, and that people whose families had been part of any terrorist attack or any freedom fighter, whichever way you want to look at it, attack, and they would be banished, the whole family would be banished. And so this woman, of course, the television and the media love to have these kind of discussions and to try and force us to fight on TV. So we came to the television and I went to talk to this mother and I said to her, look, you and I both lost children. Both of us have the same color tears. I will respect you with whatever you want to say, and I hope that you will do the same for me, which she did, and which I did, and we had a very refined conversation on television, not too much to the delight of the person who was interviewing us. And afterwards, I invited her to come to my home to meet Palestinian mothers, because in her life she had never met a Palestinian, but she was quite ready to have them hanged. So our message is this, that if you bring me Arnold Roth and he's willing to talk to me, I would be delighted to do just that. Because otherwise, I have noticed over the years that he has become much, much more radical than he ever was. He's doing wonderful charitable work in the name of his daughter, and I respect that.
Mindy.
Thank you all very much. My name is Mindy Reiser. I'm involved in a number of NGOs in this country and elsewhere. I want to ask for more information about the wonderful joint projects you have. Could you say specifically more about the program of the summer camp? And then you mentioned the 18 to 25-year-olds. I gather that some of them are facilitators, but what else are they doing? And also, do you have any connections with Kab Mashveh, which I have met the members of a long time ago, working on employment and business opportunities for Arab Israelis and Palestinians? And also, any ideas about joint economic development projects? I don't know what life is like every day in the refugee camps. I don't know if Israelis can come there and work with Palestinians to set up businesses, or for Palestinians to go to other parts outside of the refugee camps. This is all quite terra incognita. So if you could talk about these separate issues, we really need to know more.
I will start from the last one. You know, since Oslo Agreement, and according to Oslo Agreement, there is areas called A, B, C, which is to allow the Palestinians, allow the Israelis, not allowed, blah, 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 which is destroyed in 2002. There is nothing called Area A. The Israelis, they're not really coming to my camp, and they cannot come into my camp. And in illegal issues and security things, and also how come. But there's a lot of Israelis coming to the West Bank, and they joined a lot of struggle against the walls, against the settlements, against the occupation, and we did a lot of these things together in the West Bank. we don't have any kind of project with a way of economic. We are not organization that want to bring money for their members or their participate. All what we look for to convince more our members, this is the way of path and reconciliation. And the other thing, how much all this message to be spread in the Palestinian and Israeli society with the public. And a special programs, for example, the summer camp. Last summer camp, it was built, and we have the fund from a new organization that they want to teach the children the food, how to cook. And there was at the beginning really so against, and I don't want, and I don't want to be like this with all this normalization issues, that is everything is easy and everything is fine and they have to play and to have fun. But at the end, really, I was, when I saw the kids, I went together with Robi and other members to see how they are doing. And when I saw the kids, how they have really fun and they speak with each other, and the food, it's become part from our identity, as we call it, identity and culture and tradition. So they started to talk about it, and it was a very, very good 5 days that they spent together. And together with the cook, they really spend a lot of times explaining what's mean the life in Palestine and explaining what the meaning of the life in Israel. And all this continuation of this dialogue, I'm not sure, it's not about that in a very high level of dialogue, but you know, that's very good for their age. The specific really projects, I think that if I start, I will talk after tomorrow morning, but I will really support that. You can go to www.theparentscircle.org, and Shiri, our leaders here, she will give you also the annual report for 2017, because just yesterday the annual report for 2018 was printed, so next time. But you can go to the website and you can see everything's there. Oh, last question.
This man has had his hand up right
Almost,
since the
my
beginning.
Yes.
You're being unfair.
Oh, okay.
You know, I know I agree.
I am.
Okay.
And he'll be okay.
So
We're
that's
going to get
okay?
to him. We're going to get to
I
him.
can. Okay.
Shorter, yeah, shorter range. In fact, let's take the last, say, 3 questions, and then
Okay.
Thank you. I am Emir. I am from Iran. I am researcher fellow at Georgetown University.
I didn't hear a word you said.
Okay. Georgetown. Slowly.
Georgetown University?
Yes, researcher fellow at Georgetown University. I have 2 quick questions. I know that you are talking about the peace and everything. It is a very good idea, but do you really think that you can find any common ground between Palestinian and Israel? I mean, for example, you have a war about 50 years.
We have
Could you
what?
find
War. Milchama.
Sorry, Ani lo הבנתי.
I think that in this period of time, could you find, for example, common grounds? And do you have any idea about the real peace, not just talking? And then my second question is about the Iran's rule about this peace building. Do you think that really Iran have a bad, for example, effects on your peace, or do you have another idea? Thank you.
we're going to take a few questions. And then we're
But I won't remember then. You'll have to tell me. I'm senile.
Hi, my name is Ira Weiss. I'm also with New Story Leadership. So all 3 of you have mentioned have pointed out that the mission, in a way, is to prepare the grassroots for whatever political arrangement, final status agreement is ever reached. I wonder if both of you are willing to talk about how you would like to see, what would you like to see that agreement look like, that final status agreement, whenever it happens? How do you envision it coming about, or what would you like to see it include?
Okay.
Last one, yes.
And Aviva?
Aviva.
Hi, can you hear me? I can talk louder.
Yeah, that's good.
My name is Aviva Meyer. I'm on the board of Americans for Peace Now. I'm also acting CEO for the moment for Americans for Peace Now. I'm on the International Council of the New Israel Fund. So you've got my politics down straight. I want to say one thing and ask two quick questions. When this lady said she had these comments about why nonprofit groups, I think even the questions that have been asked today remind us of how complicated and complex this issue is. And just common sense, never mind experience or intellectual depth, suggests that everything we can do, whether we live in the Middle East or whether we live elsewhere, to move the process forward. There isn't one answer for what the picture will look like or what exactly the piece will look like, but it is up to those of us who are presumably all of us sitting here today care about it. We need to encourage every nonprofit group. They might not have the answers to everything, but I do have a couple of questions for you, easy ones. First of all, would you, Howard, would you say something briefly, although you can tell me later, about, I thought USAID did not fund in Israel. So now I'm interested, that I don't care about so much, they've got plenty of money, but I wonder what happened with USAID with the money that you guys lost, one. Two, here's, I don't know if this occurred to anybody else. I wonder who are the bereaved parents that join on both sides. I've got a clear picture from Robi where her politics are. I don't have the same, all the Israelis that join moderate liberal people, because Im Tirtzu is on the other side, and I don't know, who joins there and who joins among the Palestinians? Is there a picture or is it all kinds of people? Those should be easy questions.
Okay.
What was the first
I
one?
think that's all we have time for. So I'm going to do Aviva's question about USAID very quickly and then let you guys finish up. USAID does not work in Israel. USAID works in the West Bank and Gaza, but the mission is based in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. So there's no Israel program, never was. We were funding these guys, yes.
Specific program.
Yes. It's the organization under a conflict mitigation program that works cross-border. Okay, so it's a very special kind of thing.
Yeah, but now, actually now they cut the fund for the cross-border work, for the joint organization. But still, the fund from the USAID, it's going to the Israeli organization. They work inside Israel.
Yeah. It's a special case for grassroots organizations under conflict mitigation, okay? The loss of funds is a very complicated story. I very highly recommend Ori Neer's podcast with Laura Friedman and Deborah Shushan. Yes, okay, so that, if that didn't explain it to you, then we have to have a long conversation, because a lot of pieces to it. Okay, so.
What was that question?
So from the young man from Georgetown, the essence of it was, can you find common ground between Israelis and Palestinians? From Ira, what should final...
Let's just take one at a time now. Georgetown. First, I need to tell you, Mr. Georgetown, you should talk to the president of Georgetown, because he happens to be a huge supporter of the Parent Circle. And they know exactly about the work we're doing, because they also evaluated and taught us a lot. They invited 12 of us to come to Georgetown to train the trainer. So from that point of view, why on earth would we be sitting here if we didn't believe that there was common ground? The common ground is the desire for a peaceful existence. What does everybody basically want in their life? They want to get up in the morning and go to work and not have to listen to their mobile phone every 5 minutes to see what's happening, and just to have their children to go to a decent school. And what do I want? I don't want my grandchild to go to the army next year. I'm terrified, okay? So that's the reason that we do this work, because if we didn't believe in what we were doing, gee, I can stay at home in my house in Jaffa and, you know, have tea parties. Not that I'm good at baking, but whatever. So how, you know, I really suggest that you look into the work deeply of what we're doing, and I think you'll find it interesting. A lot of the professors from Georgetown were involved with us. Craig Zelitzer, who moved to Columbia, but did amazing work with us, and Carrie Menkel-Meadow, and Jack DeJoya.
You know what is common between us? We have two options. Or to share that land, on the land, and to live, or to share this land under the land. This is the only things that we can share and the common with us. Or to build, really, we will share it with a good life and a good conditions and a normal life, or we'll share it under the land, which is mean all of us will be killed and more. This is the common.
Do either of you want to talk about final status?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
I'll tell you, it's what is, I think, very important to know is that we're not affiliated to any political party. Of course, we all have our own opinions, and of course, any peace work is political. But I don't want to go down that road. There are much cleverer people than us who can come up. We all know what the solution is, actually. And all I care about is that my grandchildren will not have to grow up and that in the way that they are now, and that Mazen's children will not be worried at night when soldiers come into the camp. I care about the well-being of people. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for listening.
Finished?
Have anything else you want to say?
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, and thank you all very much. We appreciate your participation and your engagement in this. And think of the parent circle from time to time when you're trying to figure out where you can help folks.